What if the turkey was already on the table, and nobody called me to sit down? What if they had set 12 places, and not one of them was mine? What if the family I had given 68 years of my life to had simply forgotten I was in the house? I stood at the top of the stairs that Christmas Eve and asked myself those questions. Not out loud. I have never been the kind of woman who talks to herself. But they moved through my mind one after another, quiet and cold. The way a draft comes under a door you thought you'd sealed shut. My name is Theodora Kingsley. Everyone who has known me longer than 5 minutes calls me Teddy. My late husband Raymond used to say that Theodora was a name for a woman who wore pearls to breakfast, and since I have always been more of a flannel shirt and instant coffee person, Teddy suited me better. Raymond passed 4 years ago this February. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I still reach for his hand in the dark sometimes, and every single time I remember, it feels like the first time I've lost him. We lived in the same house in Guelph, Ontario for 31 years. A 2-story Victorian on Cardigan Street, with a front porch that needed painting every other summer, and a backyard maple that Raymond planted as a sapling the year our son was born. After Raymond died, I stayed. People asked why I didn't downsize, didn't move closer to one of the kids, didn't sell and go somewhere warmer. I stayed because the house still smelled like him in the mornings when the heat came up through the old radiators. I stayed because I knew where everything was. I stayed because it was mine and I had earned it. I have 2 children. My son Spencer is 41 and lives in Mississauga with his wife, Diane Frobisher Crane, and their 2 boys. My daughter Patty is 38 and lives 20 minutes from me, still in Guelph with her husband Marcus Webb. Patty and I used to be close. Not in the loud, dramatic way some mothers and daughters are, but in the practical, comfortable way. She would drop by on a Tuesday with no reason, just to sit at the kitchen table and drink tea. After Raymond died, that changed. I told myself grief does that. I told myself she was busy. I told myself a lot of things. Spencer had suggested we spend Christmas Eve at Patty's this year. He and Diane, as the boys would drive up from Mississauga, everyone would eat together. The boys would open one present at midnight, the way we used to do when Spencer and Patty were small. I thought it was a lovely idea. I baked 24 shortbread cookies the night before, wrapped them in wax paper and red ribbon the way my own mother taught me. I ironed my good burgundy blouse. I arrived at Patty's at 5 o'clock, same as everyone else. The first thing I noticed when I walked through the door was the noise. Not the warm kind of noise, the kind a house makes when it's full of people who are happy to see each other. This was a different noise. Urgent, low. The kind of noise that stops when you walk into the room. It stopped when I walked into the room. Patty was in the kitchen. Marcus Webb was at the dining table, with his laptop open, which I thought was strange for Christmas Eve. Spencer was standing by the window with his arms crossed, and Diane Frobisher Crane was beside him with a glass of wine and an expression I could not quite read. The boys were upstairs. I could hear them running above our heads. When I came in, Patty said, "Oh, Mum, you're here," in the tone of voice you use when a parcel arrives earlier than expected and you haven't cleared a space for it yet. I put my shortbread on the counter. I hugged my grandchildren when they thundered downstairs. I poured myself a glass of water, because nobody offered me anything, and I have never been comfortable asking. And then I sat in the armchair in the corner of the living room, the one nobody else wanted, because it faced away from the television. And I watched my family move around each other, like a system with its own gravity. And I noticed, slowly and then all at once, that I was not part of that system. Dinner was ready at 7. The table sat 8. There were place settings for 7. I counted twice before I was sure. 7 plates, 7 wine glasses, 7 sets of cutlery. Patty had set a chair at the far end for Diane Frobisher Crane's mother, who had apparently been invited without anyone mentioning it to me, and the table was full. I stood in the doorway of the dining room for what felt like a long time. Nobody looked up. "Patty," I said finally, "where would you like me to sit?" She looked at the table. She looked at me. A flash of something crossed her face. Not guilt, exactly. More like the face you make when you realize you've left your umbrella somewhere, and you're not sure you can be bothered to go back for it. "Oh," she said. "I thought. Marcus, didn't we talk about getting the folding table from the basement?" Marcus Webb looked up from his laptop. He had not, as far as I could tell, helped prepare any part of this meal. "I'll get it," he said. But he didn't move. "It's fine," I said. "Because what else do you say? You don't make a scene at Christmas. You don't stand in your daughter's dining room and say what you're actually thinking, which is, I am 68 years old. I drove myself here in the dark on icy roads because you asked me to come. I brought shortbread that I made from scratch. I am your mother. I carried you. I should have a chair." Instead, I said it's fine, and I helped Spencer bring up the folding table from the basement, and I sat at it alone in the corner while the rest of my family ate at the real table and had a conversation I couldn't quite hear from where I was sitting. I thought about Raymond. I thought about how, every Christmas Eve we ever had, he would make sure I had the seat closest to the kitchen, so I could get up easily without disturbing anyone. And then he would refill my glass without asking and squeeze my shoulder when he passed. Little things. The kind of little things you don't understand are keeping you afloat until they're gone, and you realize you've been drowning slowly for 4 years, and you've gotten so used to it, you've stopped noticing. After dinner, Marcus Webb went back to his laptop. The boys went back upstairs. Spencer and Diane Frobisher-Crane sat on the sofa together, and at some point Patty joined them, and they were talking about something. I could see from the body language that it was something serious, something that required leaning forward and keeping the voice low. I sat in the armchair again. I checked my phone. I looked at the Christmas tree. I thought about my shortbread, which nobody had touched. Then Patty's youngest, 8-year-old Robbie, came downstairs for a glass of water and detoured through the living room and climbed, without invitation, into my lap. He was at the age where he still did things like that. I put my arms around him and he smelled like little boy, like outside and Christmas, and something faintly sticky. And for a moment I felt completely fine. I felt like myself. "Grandma Teddy," he said, "are you going to live in our house now?" I looked at him. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" He scrunched his nose the way he did when he was thinking hard. "I heard Dad say something about the house. About Grandma Teddy's house. What did he say? That it was worth a lot now, and that it was silly to let it just sit there." He looked up at me with his very serious 8-year-old face. "Are you going to live here now instead? Because you could have my room. I don't mind." I held on to him for another moment. I kept my face very still. I have had 68 years of practice keeping my face still. "That's very kind of you, Robbie," I said. "Why don't you go get your water and go back upstairs?" After he left, I sat with that information the way you sit with something hot, carefully, at a distance, waiting to understand how badly it was going to burn. My house. Worth a lot now. Silly to let it sit there. I thought about the conversations I had noticed, but not understood over the past few months. Spencer calling more often than usual, but always with questions wrapped inside small talk. "How's the upkeep on the house, Mum? Those old Victorians can be a lot of work. Have you thought about whether it still makes sense for just one person?" Patty stopping by in September to walk through the rooms with what she called fresh eyes, saying things like the bones are incredible. And you know what this kitchen could be. Marcus Webb, who had barely spoken to me directly in the 7 years he'd been married to my daughter, suddenly interested in property values in Wellington County. How had I not added it up? I am not a stupid woman. I taught high school English for 32 years. I can read a text. I had simply not wanted to. I got up from the armchair. I went to the kitchen and I rinsed my glass and I put on my coat. I took my keys from my purse. I picked up the shortbread from the counter, still wrapped, still untouched, and I put it in my bag. I do not know exactly why I took it back. Some instinct, some refusal to leave even that much of myself behind, in a place where it wasn't wanted. I walked to the front door. What I felt was not anger. I want to be precise about that, because anger would have been simpler. Anger has an energy to it, a direction, a sense that something can be done. What I felt was something quieter and more permanent. It was the feeling of a door closing, not slamming, just closing quietly, with a soft click, the kind that you barely notice until you try the handle later and find it locked. I opened Patty's front door and I stepped out into the cold. It was a clear night, one of those Ontario winter nights where the sky is almost purple, and there are more stars than you expect, and your breath comes out in long white clouds. and the snow on the ground has a thin crust of ice, so it crunches under your boots. I stood on the front step for a moment, and I listened to the sound of my family inside the house. The low murmur of the conversation they were having, that did not include me, the sound of the television. Robbie's feet on the stairs, and then I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for a while with the engine off. I watched the light in Patty's living room window. At one point I saw a shadow cross it. Someone standing up, moving across the room, and I thought, now they'll notice. Now someone will look at the armchair and see it's empty and come to the door. Nobody came to the door. I started the engine. I drove home through streets that were nearly empty, the way streets get on Christmas Eve when everyone is inside with someone. The radio played a carol I couldn't name, something choral and high and aching. I didn't cry, which surprised me. I thought I would cry. Instead, I felt strangely clear-headed, the way you feel sometimes after a very long sleep. The world coming into focus, edges sharp, everything a little more itself than it was before. My house on Cardigan Street was dark when I pulled in. I had left the porch light on, which I always do, but the inside was dark, and for a moment I just sat in the driveway and looked at it. 31 years, the maple in the backyard, now 40 years old, taller than the roofline. The front porch that still had Raymond's Muskoka chair in the corner, because I had never been able to bring myself to move it, even though it was slowly going gray from weather. My house. Not silly to let it sit there. Not sitting at all. Full of 31 years of a life I built with my own hands, with my own work. With a man who loved me completely, and 2 children I loved completely, and 1,000 Sunday dinners and 1,000 small rissonassart, and 1,000 mornings of instant coffee in the kitchen, watching the backyard maple change, season by season. I went inside, I put the kettle on. I unwrapped the shortbread and set a few pieces on a plate. The good plate, the one with the blue border that had been Raymond's mother's. And I sat at the kitchen table in my coat because I had not yet taken it off, and I ate a piece of shortbread in the quiet of my own house on Christmas Eve. It was good shortbread. I am a good baker. I always have been. My phone was in my coat pocket and it did not ring for a long time. Long enough that I had finished my tea and washed the cup and changed into my housecoat and was sitting in the living room with a book I wasn't really reading. An hour, maybe longer. Then it rang, and it was Spencer, and when I answered his voice had that particular quality, controlled but strained, the way you talk when you are trying to sound calm, but you are not calm. Mum, where are you? I'm at home, Spencer. A pause. Nobody saw you leave. No, I said. You didn't. Another pause, longer this time. Mum, it's Christmas Eve, why did you? I was tired, I said, which was true. I was very tired. I'm home safe, thank the kids for me. Merry Christmas. I hung up. I am not by nature a dramatic person. I did not hang up to make a point. I hung up because I had said everything I had to say, which was almost nothing, and I did not want to say more. I did not want to have the conversation where I explained what I was feeling, because I did not think I could explain it in a way that would be understood, and I did not think I had the energy to try. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from spending decades making yourself smaller, so that the people around you can be comfortable. And that night, sitting in my living room on Cardigan Street, I felt every year of it. I did not sleep well. I lay in the dark. And I thought about what Robbie had said. And I thought about all the small conversations I had misread, or chosen not to understand. And I thought about the table with 7 places set and no chair for me. And I thought about Raymond. Not with grief this time, but with something closer to gratitude. He would have known, I thought. He would have seen it sooner than I did. And he would have found a way to address it without anyone feeling cornered, because he was better than me at that. But he also would have put his hand on the small of my back and said, quietly, so only I could hear, Teddy, you don't have to stay somewhere you're not wanted. Nobody is ever required to stay. In the morning, Christmas morning, gray and still, I called a woman named Ruth Callender, who had been my closest friend for 37 years. Ruth and I had taught at the same school for 20 of those years, and she had moved to Prince Edward Island after her retirement, but we spoke every Sunday without exception. I called her at 7, which was early even for Ruth, who kept farmer's hours, and she picked up on the second ring. I told her everything, the table, the folding table in the corner. What Robbie had said about the house, the drive home, the shortbread, all of it. I told her in the flat, factual way I tell things when I am trying to hold myself together, and when I finished, Ruth was quiet for a moment. "Teddy," she said, "do you have a lawyer?" I did. Raymond and I had drawn up our wills together 14 years ago. The lawyer's name was Gerald Ashworth of Ashworth and Pine on Stone Road. I had not thought about those documents in a long time. I called Gerald Ashworth's office the next business day and made an appointment. I did not tell Spencer or Patty. I want to be clear about something. I did not go to Gerald Ashworth out of revenge. I have never wanted revenge. I went because, for the first time in 4 years, I understood something that Robbie's 8 words had made suddenly and brutally plain. My house was not just a house to my children. It was an asset. And, as long as I was an old woman alone in a big Victorian on Cardigan Street, they would continue to manage their relationship with me, based on what they imagined they might one day inherit. And I had been, without realizing it, living my grief and my loneliness inside that arrangement. Wondering why my children felt so far away. Wondering what I had done wrong. I had done nothing wrong. I had simply not yet decided to do something different. Gerald Ashworth was a calm, methodical man who had the good sense not to ask me more questions than necessary. I told him I wanted to update my will. I told him about a small heritage trust fund I wanted to establish. Raymond and I had saved carefully, and there was more there than the children knew. And I told him about the Guelph Community Foundation, which I had quietly supported for years and which Raymond had loved. Gerald Ashworth made notes and nodded and said he'd have a draft to me in 2 weeks. As I drove home from his office, something loosened in my chest that had been tight for a long time. Not happiness exactly. Something more like the feeling of setting down something heavy that you've been carrying so long you forgot it wasn't your own weight. I did not call Patty or Spencer for 2 weeks. Not out of anger, I want to keep saying that, but because I was genuinely occupied. I cleared out the room that had been Raymond's study, and I turned it into a proper reading room, with the good chair from the basement and the lamp I'd always meant to use. I baked. I went to the Tuesday evening potlucks at St. George's, which I had attended sporadically for years, and had been meaning to go to more regularly. And I ended up talking to a woman named Heather Dumont who had retired from engineering, and was starting a book club, and asked if I'd be interested. I said yes before she'd finished asking. I called Ruth Calander on Sunday as usual. I realized, living in my house, not managing it, not maintaining it for someone else's eventual inheritance, living in it. Spencer called in the 2nd week of January. He had the voice again, controlled, strained. "Mum, Patty and I have been worried. You went quiet after Christmas." "I've been busy," I said, which was true. "We'd like to come by, sit down together, talk about things." "What things?" A pause. "Just how you're doing, the house, whether you have everything you need." I understood the conversation they wanted to have. I had understood it since Christmas Eve. "Spencer," I said, "I'm doing very well, thank you. I have everything I need. You're welcome to come by for tea, but I want you to know that there's nothing to discuss about the house. It's been taken care of." "What do you mean, taken care of?" "I mean, I've updated my arrangements," I said. Gerald Ashworth is my lawyer, you have his number. If you have questions, you can call him." The silence that followed was long enough that I looked at the phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "Mum," Spencer said finally, and his voice had changed. The controlled quality was gone. He sounded for the first time in years genuinely uncertain. We weren't trying to." "I know," I said, and I meant it. They were not villains. They were people who had grown up and grown busy, and stopped seeing me clearly. And when that happens, people tend to see what's useful. That's not a story about evil. It's just a story about drift. About how quietly and gradually the people who love you can stop paying attention to who you actually are. I know you weren't. But I needed you to understand that I'm not going anywhere, and the house is not available. It's my home. I intend to live in it for as long as I'm able, and after that, I've made my own decisions. "Can we still come for tea?" Spencer asked. He sounded smaller than I had heard him in a long time. He sounded like my son. "Yes," I said. "Of course you can. Come Sunday. Bring the boys." They came Sunday. All of them. Spencer and Diane Frobisher Crane and the 2 boys, and Patty and Marcus Webb. It was the first time Marcus Webb had been in my house in over a year. He brought a bottle of wine, which I thought was his version of an apology, and I accepted it in the same spirit. We ate at my table, the real one with the good cloth and the blue border dishes, and there were seats for everyone. I had counted this time. I had counted twice. It was not a warm afternoon, not in the easy way family afternoons used to be. There was a carefulness to it, a consideration, people choosing their words with a little more attention than usual, making room for each other with a self-consciousness that showed they had noticed. At some level, that room had been required. I found I didn't mind that. Carefulness is not nothing. Carefulness is sometimes the beginning of something. At one point, Robbie climbed into my lap the way he always did, and I put my arms around him and he said, quietly, so only I could hear, "Grandma Teddy, you smell like Christmas." "That's the shortbread," I said. "I made some this morning." He twisted to look up at me. "Did you bring it?" "It's in the kitchen," I said. "Go ask your mum to cut some for everyone." He scrambled down and ran for the kitchen, and I watched him go, and I felt the weight of the afternoon. Everything it held, everything it was trying to repair, and I thought, this is what I stayed for. Not the house. Not the maple in the backyard or the porch that needs painting. Or the radiators that smell like Raymond on winter mornings. I stayed for this boy, climbing into my lap and smelling like outside, and running for the kitchen. And reminding me, without meaning to, that there is still something here that is worth holding on to. But I was not the same woman who had stood at the top of the stairs on Christmas Eve and waited to be invited to her own family's table. I had driven home in the dark and eaten shortbread alone on the good plate, and called Ruth Callender at 7 in the morning, and walked into Gerald Ashworth's office and done what needed to be done. And somewhere in all of that, in the doing of small practical things, for no one but myself, I had found something I hadn't known I'd lost. I had found the thread back to myself, to Theodora Kingsley, who everyone called Teddy, who taught English for 32 years and baked excellent shortbread, and had loved and been loved by Raymond for 39 years, and had cried exactly once in the days after the diagnosis and then rolled up her sleeves and been present for every single one of the remaining 11 weeks. That woman had been here all along. She had just gotten very quiet. She wasn't quiet anymore. I have my house on Cardigan Street. I have the maple in the backyard, and the reading room I made from Raymond's study, and the Tuesday potluck at St. George's, and the book club with Heather Dumont, and the Sunday calls with Ruth Callender. I have shortbread. I bake when I feel like baking it, and the good plate with the blue border that was Raymond's mother's, and the Muskoka chair on the front porch that I brought inside this spring and had refinished. It looks beautiful. Raymond would have liked it. I have my grandchildren climbing into my lap, and I have my children coming for Sunday tea. And it is not perfect, and it is not the way I imagined it would be at 68, but it is real, and it is mine. And I am awake inside it in a way I was not awake before Christmas Eve. That is more than enough. That is, it turns out, quite a lot.